Jessica Goldman is a food and health writer based in San Francisco. She has completed 6 triathlons and recently backpacked through New Zealand. Time and again, she has been told by her doctors that she is the healthiest, unhealthy person they have ever met. In 2004, an aggressive attack of an autoimmune disease, lupus, landed Jessica in the hospital with seizures and kidney failure. After 3 months, 2 rounds of chemotherapy, apheresis, dialysis, and amazing medical care, Jessica's body stabilized and she was able to return home. She survived, but her kidneys did not. And from the beginning of this new journey, Jessica was determined to do whatever she could to live a full and healthy life, which, among other measures, meant keeping a strict low-sodium diet. She graduated from Stanford University in 2005 and recently led the professional nest working in nonprofit development to begin a freelance career of her own, putting her health first. In 2009, she began her blog, Sodium Girl, which follows her low-sodium adventures, mishaps, and successes in the kitchen and beyond. She has written about low-sodium diets and living with kidney disease and lupus in local and national publications, including Ladies' Home Journal, Better Homes and Gardens, Arthritis Today magazine, Living Without magazine, Lupus Now magazine, and the San Francisco Chronicle. She lectures and blogs on behalf of national health organizations and will be releasing a cookbook next year with Wiley Publishing. Even with all her health needs and restrictions, Jessica Goldman lives a full and limitless life and strives to help others to find the same joy and freedom in overcoming their challenges. Please welcome Jessica Goldman.
Well, that's basically it. Does anybody have any questions?
I have salt with it.
As I said, we'll get to that. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I am so impressed by how educated you are already, and hopefully the two of us can give you some extra tips to just keep on doing the wonderful job you're doing taking care of yourself. But to start, I first want to begin with a disclaimer. I am not a nutritionist. I am not a doctor, although I could play a really convincing one on television. I am not a professional cook. I have never enrolled in cooking school. I don't have a cooking degree. I don't have a medical degree. All I am is a 28-year-old who watches a lot of food television shows, and I have kidney disease. And I also think I have some tips that will help you live an equally fun, enjoyable life and eat and drink up everything that life has to offer you. But before I get into all of that, I wanted to first ask, how many of you have been told by a doctor to go on a low-sodium diet? Just raise your hand. So almost everybody. And how many of you said, hey, that sounds like an awesome idea? 2 people. That's very impressive. Usually it's nobody. And how many of you actually think, as the story we heard earlier, actually think you are on a low-sodium diet? Okay, so a couple of you. And I'm going to pick on you in the red pinkish shirt. Yeah, you. And I would love to know what that means to you, to be on a low-sodium diet.
You really have to just watch everything that you eat. We don't, just not adding salt is not an option for all the rest of this stuff. The canned food's gone. And a lot more frozen. I work in the fresh produce industry and was shocked to see how much sodium is actually in fresh fruit and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to try to limit any of that.
Right.
Anything that's processed.
Right. And a follow-up question being, what do you miss most? What are the biggest challenges for you in terms of keeping a low-sodium diet?
Popcorn.
And anything else, like the challenge of eating out? Do you feel limited at all in what you can eat?
Yes.
Yes.
I would say typically we don't, when we go out, it's kind of try to choose the best and do different things you go out so you can
Mhm.
actually enjoy it.
Great, thank you so much. It sounds like you guys are doing a great job as well. As you heard in my wonderful introduction, I too was told to be on a low sodium diet. I have been where you have been. I was handed that DASH guide. I looked at it. I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to eat? And I thought I was going to be limited to a very bland world of steamed vegetables and, boiled meat. And I could have lived a very good life on dialysis. I was waiting, let me back up. So as you know, I was diagnosed with lupus out of nowhere just days after I turned 21 and rushed to the hospital. I was in complete renal failure. It was in my brain and my kidneys. And after all of the medical treatment, I did survive, but my kidneys were totally gone. Biopsies got passed around the nation. They were declared the worst kidneys they had ever seen. So I was on first hemodialysis and then transferred to peritoneal dialysis, which I did at home and at school as I was continuing in college. And I was waiting for a transplant, and my dad was a match. So yes, I could have lived a life on all of that, waiting on dialysis, waiting for a transplant. But I was 21 years old, and I wanted much more than that. The one thing that was getting me down was the fact that this disease felt uncontrollable. I felt like I was constantly on other people's schedules, whether it was dialysis or waiting for the kidney transplant or going to tons of doctor's appointments. And so I decided from day one that I would do whatever I could to add to my medical care and give my body and give my kidneys the best chance at working however much they ever wanted to work again. And that's when I decided to take that low sodium diet and take it very seriously. And my doctors just told me to go on a low sodium diet. They handed me the DASH guide. I saw a few nutritionists, but I was very confused. I was very uninspired. I didn't know where to start. And I didn't know how to make it work with my life as a whole, not just me sitting alone in my kitchen. But I hit the internet, I hit the bookstore, I hit the stove, I experimented. And what I found was that I could live on a 500 to 1,000 milligram diet every day. That's less than half a teaspoon of salt. And I also realized that my body really liked it. I ended up not needing a transplant. I have been officially off of dialysis for over 7 years. I now just live on a diet and a handful of medication every day. My kidneys, which were said to were beyond repair, have now partially regenerated. They work at 43%. Every year they get better. Now everybody is different. So everybody is going to respond to salt or phosphorus or potassium or yoga or meditation differently. But the point is, there are things you can do risk-free with help from your doctor and dietitian that will allow you to take your uncontrollable feeling healthcare back into your own two hands, literally. And diet is one of them. So I want to talk to you about this diet that I'm on. Now, just like you said, these were the rules that I thought went along with a low sodium diet. No salt shaker, no canned items like soups and pastas and sauces, no convenience food, nothing that was quick and easy, snacks. I thought everything was going to take forever to make. No salt heavy sauces like soy and teriyaki or fish sauce, and no eating out, or at least not eating any exciting meals. Now, as I said before, I was 21, I was very stubborn, and I was determined to take this diet seriously, but I was also determined to make it work for me. So I decided to break all of those rules. Because if I was going to be alive, I really wanted to live, and I love food, and I wanted to eat good food. And we live in the Bay Area where there's some of the best food, anywhere. So I wanted to take a part of that. I wanted to travel. I wanted to be able to take last minute road trips. I wanted to go to a restaurant without having to call 3 days ahead to make sure that they had something for me to eat and get not only a good meal, a really good meal. And after 7 years, I figured out how that's possible. And it all starts by redefining flavor. Salt is one tool you have to flavor food. I love when people say, oh, you're on a salt-free diet? That just sounds horrible. That sounds bland. And I say, have you ever taken a look at a spice cabinet before? Because there are just hundreds of things you can use to flavor your food. And this is just a few of them. And not to mention natural foods themselves pack a ton of flavor in them naturally. So I actually realized when I started a low sodium, no salt diet, I had actually been limiting my taste buds more before my kidney disease than I was afterwards. I was eating a very, I wouldn't say I wasn't adventurous, I was just a bit boring in the kitchen. I loved macaroni and cheese and fried chicken and pasta, and that was about it. I had never tried Thai cuisine. I rarely ate Japanese or Chinese. I didn't use curries. I didn't use any of these spices growing up. And it was actually when I had to lose the salt that I became much more adventurous in my cooking, and I think a much more adventurous person in general. And for those people who say, well, the low sodium food, salt-free food doesn't actually taste very good, I'm glad you're sitting down because I'm about to show you some very sexy pictures of the kinds of meals that you can make. You can make things like this. You can make this. Yeah, that's seaweed and that has 0 sodium in it. You can make buffalo wings. Macaroni and peas. My fun little twist on macaroni and cheese. What do these look like to you? Scallops? They're not scallops. They're halibut, but they look and taste like scallops. They're scallops. And look at that. Juicy, honey-baked pork chop. And my point of showing you these photos is with some creativity, knowledge, and some savvy substitutions, there's nothing you can't make at home, except for probably bacon, but I'm working on it, so I'll get back to you in a few years. And this isn't just a philosophy for eating and for health, this is a philosophy for your life on a low sodium diet. There will always be challenges, because eating is a social activity. It's a part of our everyday. And when you're limited in what you can eat, it's a little bit harder to do things. But there are always creative solutions to not only make it work, but make it more enjoyable than ever before. So now how many of you guys think a low sodium diet sounds fun? Okay, so I have some work to do. The truth is, when you're taking out the salt and the sodium, there are some sacrifices, and there are changes you have to make. And you're going to have to shell out extra bits of the following, the first being money. Now, I'm not talking about money spent on food. It may seem that when you're buying whole ingredients and not the canned and packaged goods, it's going to be more expensive. That is true for some parts of the country. Here in California, the truth is the whole ingredients, the fresh ingredients, even the frozen ingredients will always be cheaper than those big packaged meals. I have been cooking up a storm for this cookbook. I've been cooking 6 meals a day, and that are supposed to feed between 4 and 6 people, and I rarely spent over $60 on all those ingredients, which is averaging $1 to $2 per person per meal. And I asked the checker out girl why. I mean, I was shocked how little money I was spending on huge quantities of food. And she told me that's because I was buying everything that was whole ingredients and making it from scratch. So money-wise, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about making your kitchen your most favorite place to be in your house. Because when you start this low sodium diet, you are going to be spending a lot of time there. And that means outfitting it with all the spices that sound fun to use, and oils and vinegars and fun cooking utensils that you can't wait to pick up. It also means outfitting yourself with the kinds of tools that will make cleaning up and making food easier. When I've given talks before, people say to me afterwards, well, you're just a young whippersnapper and you have all the energy in the world to cook food. Well, let me say this, I live with chronic kidney disease, so I feel like I have the flu all day, every day. I also have because of the lupus, I live with arthritic symptoms in all of my joints and chronic exhaustion and chronic pain. So I understand what it is like to be left with no energy by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the last thing you want to do is make food from scratch and then clean it up. So it's really important to have the tools that make making that dough or blending that soup very, very easy for you and easy to clean up and easy to reach. Because if you are going to have that blender in the top cabinet, you are never going to use it. So make sure you create a space for yourself that makes you want to be there and makes you want to make your own food. So, and also, if you are the type of person that likes being around people, I like to have a radio with me in the kitchen so that I can be playing music or NPR or listening to the news. So I never feel like I'm alone, and I don't feel like I'm, wasting time. And again, I'm having fun when I'm in the kitchen. The second sacrifice is effort. Now, one of the low sodium rules I mentioned before that I said I was going to break was that you can't eat convenience foods. And it's okay that that's a low sodium rule, because over 70% of America's sodium intake doesn't come from the salt shaker. It comes from processed foods. And there's a lot of other junk in there that you probably shouldn't be eating either. So it really is best to slow down and make the things you want to eat from scratch. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't products on the market, and more are showing up every day that are either no salt added or just the pure ingredients in a package form. So I think we're going to get more convenience foods as time goes on and we get more educated, but definitely now start from scratch. And the last low sodium change or sacrifice is time. And that's not just time in your kitchen or time in the grocery store. I could literally spend hours in a grocery store hunting for new things and new products. But it's time to let your taste buds adjust. I'm very careful to say this because I do believe salt has an important place in our history and in food and in developing flavor. But we've become a society that is addicted to oversalting. The food that we eat from this packaged goods has just grown in the last 50 years without us really noticing how much salt has been added. So when you think of canned soup, you're not thinking of those dried split peas or that chicken. You're thinking of the taste of salt. So it is going to take time, like any addiction, for your taste buds to adjust. But just as we've become accustomed to very salty foods, you can get accustomed to food without salt. And the really cool part is once you get over that hump, you are going to start tasting the flavor that is actually in the whole ingredient itself. And I call this the roasted pepper theory, because I didn't know peppers were sweet, very sweet. And I remember the first time, maybe 2 months after I had started this diet, that I bit into a roasted pepper, and I thought it was the most extraordinary thing I had ever tasted. And I asked the cook what they had put on it, and they said all we did was roast it in an oven, and that was it. So you will start actually enjoying and appreciating the food itself more than ever before because you've gotten rid of the salt. So now that you guys are so excited to start this low sodium diet, there are 3 very simple things you can do to not just make low sodium food, but make low sodium food that even your friends who aren't on a kidney disease diet want seconds of. It's that good, I promise you. I've had 56 friends and family test my recipes for this cookbook. None of them were on a low sodium diet. I actually asked them to qualify their love of salt before they tested, and 54 out of the 56 said they would dump salt in their mouth every day if it was socially acceptable. And they all love the food. Not just because they love me, but really, brutally honest, all love the food and said, and all of them on a rating of 1 to 10, 10 being not missing the salt at all, every recipe fell into 8 to 10. So I guarantee you, you can really make delicious food without salt. But the first thing you have to do is alter your perspective. You have to go from feeling limited to limitless. And I like to talk about charades. Everyone's played charades, right? The game where you're told not to talk, but you have to get your team to guess who you are, the movie or the book. And if you think about it, I mean, you've been talking almost your whole life. So the idea of not being able to talk, that's the only way you really know how to communicate, right? Like, you talk every day. That's how you tell people what you're thinking, what you do. All of a sudden it's gone. So what do? You start making faces, you start using wild hand gestures, you start getting really creative, and that's when the game gets really fun, and that's when you win, and you're the coolest person in the room. Same thing with eliminating salt. You find other ways of communicating flavor. And if you start thinking outside of that one little thing you can't do, you start realizing there's millions of other things that you haven't tapped into yet that do the exact same thing. So it's altering your perspective. Also have to get educated, which you all seem to be very educated. It's important to know where sodium is so you can avoid it, and also where it isn't, so you can have a really expansive list of things you can eat. For years, I was mistakenly eating things like tuna fish sandwiches with mayonnaise on bread and not low sodium tuna fish, or cereal and milk, not having any idea that those meals alone usually accounted for more than my daily intake. A bagel alone is around 400 to 600 milligrams of sodium. That's without the schmear or the lox or anything else you put on to it, or the mochaccino that you have. You will soar well into 1,000 milligrams with one single bagel breakfast in the morning. And my point is, too, that once you start realizing how much sodium is in foods naturally, like this wonderful woman pointed out to us, it's really easy to get to 500 milligrams a day, if not higher, just eating whole ingredients. Before I move on, does anybody know how much sodium, is in 1 teaspoon of salt?
2,000 milligrams.
Very close, 2,300 milligrams. And the USDA just recently passed new guidelines this year that on average Americans should be eating 2,300 milligrams a day of sodium, which is 1 teaspoon. How many people are only using 1 teaspoon of salt? And 50% of Americans, those with kidney disease or heart disease or other health complications, should be on 1,500 milligrams or less, which is less than half a teaspoon of salt. So it's really important to be tapped into this information. And not just about the overall picture of sodium, but again, individual ingredients. So I have my own, apparently this is quiz show day. This is my low sodium showdown, just to see where we all are in our education. And I want you all in your heads to think which of both the pairings has more sodium in it. 3 ounces of pork versus 1 artichoke, 1 teaspoon of baking powder versus 3 ounces of clams, 1 cup of milk versus 3 ounces of monkfish. Does everybody have their answers locked in? Are they your final answer? Are you ready to be surprised? Pork has 60 milligrams of sodium for 3 ounces, whereas an artichoke has 80 milligrams of sodium. I just found this out this year. 1 teaspoon of baking powder can have over 1,200 milligrams of sodium versus clams. Clams, they're from the sea. They're shellfish. Shouldn't they be high in sodium? Clams are actually one of the kinds of shellfish that has only 40 it has a very low amount of sodium in it, and it can really flavor food. Just throw a few of those into your stock when you're making it at home or a stew, and it's amazing what it does. Its natural salinity really comes out, and you have that satisfying, salty seawater taste to it. And 1 cup of milk, 120 milligrams of sodium for a cup versus monkfish, which only has 15 milligrams of sodium in it. I wasn't eating fish for years because I thought fish and pork I thought bacon and Christmas ham. So don't eat pork. And fish I thought seawater, salt water. I can't eat that. And going online to the USDA National Nutrition Database and buying books like the Low Sodium Pocket Guide to Foods, which is based on that nutrition database, I learned a whole host of new information that allowed me to really expand my eating list. And whenever I have questions about something, I actually just email directly the USDA National Nutrition Database. I get a personal email back. So there are people out there, whether it's a dietitian or even online or these great books, that can be literally your pocket resource to knowing this information and making safe, healthy, and satisfying choices for what you eat. And the importance of that is that in having information at your fingertips, literally you could ask me almost any ingredient and I could tell you how much sodium was in it, because nobody wants to be counting numbers when they're eating or living or traveling, whether it's carbohydrates or calories or sugar or salt. You don't want to be sitting there with a pad of paper, a book, and a calculator. What kind of life is that? So you want to be immersed in that information. So when you sit down at that restaurant menu and you see your choices, you know immediately what the good choice is. Or when you're at the grocery store, you know what you want to cook. Or when you're at your friend's house for that awesome dinner party, you know out of all of the appetizers what the best choice is. And if you have questions, ask. That's why we have professionals. That's why we have people testing the food. And also, sometimes labels can be misleading. I often see one day I'll buy a product that says it's only 20 milligrams of sodium per serving, and a month later I see it's 200 milligrams of sodium per serving. So if you come across things and you want to make the smart choice and you need the information, go onto the website, Google, call the people at that company. You can even call companies for very little money. You send the product to them and they can test the amount of phosphorus or potassium or sodium in it. So there are always things you can do to get your answers. And like that PSA ad, the more you know, the better food you'll eat. And then finally, be creative, take risks. So much about this is exploring new things, because the more you can surprise your palate, the less it'll even know to miss the salt. And again, that's all about having fun with this. Don't think of it as a challenge in a bad way. This is like your own personal Iron Chef competition. Live life without salt and do it in a very, very creative way. And part of that is not just going to events like this and speaking to people with kidney disease or renal specialty who can really help you with the finite information. It's also about watching shows, taking cooking classes, reading, getting cookbooks that are loaded with salt. Because even though you can't use the salt, you can use them for inspiration. You can use them to learn how to make that egg drop soup, so you can go home and then figure out how to do it without salt. So you also don't have to be limited in those things either. My kitchen is full of cookbooks, and maybe only 3 of them are low sodium specific. Everything else I use as a canvas off of which I get to do my own creations. And the cool part is, having to take out the salt, automatically all these dishes are no longer Julia Child's or Thomas Keller's or Bobby Flay's, they're mine. So you can be proud of that. And again, use the natural flavors found in Whole Foods. Those are your best weapons, because if you really honor and celebrate the food itself, it's always going to taste good. So start there. Don't think about the salt. Think about what it is that you're actually cooking. a lot of what my blog is about, I talk a lot about, everything from how to eat well in an airport, to my favorite restaurants, to my horrible baking disasters, because cooking's easy. Baking is a science unto itself, and you have to get a PhD for that. And especially when it comes to salt-free cooking, you're talking so much more about salt as flavor, but chemistry, that it gets a little bit difficult. But there are books out there, and I actually have made a lot of friends. I'm very close with local Bay Area chefs now, because I've had to develop a very personal relationship with the people who make my food. And they're always willing. I'll send them questions like, how do I make this angel food cake with less eggs and no baking powder? And they will figure it out for me and send a recipe. So you're really going, it may take more effort, but it's going to pay you back tenfold. So one of the main things I do on my website is salt-freeing a recipe. And that is taking the saltiest foods you could think of and finding no salt, low sodium substitutions that make them taste equally as good. And anybody can do this. Again, I am not trained at all. I just watch a lot of Food Network. And I think creatively about it, and I find fun in the challenge. So how you salt-free a recipe is you take a recipe and you identify the high sodium ingredients first, because those are the things that you have to replace. Then you describe those high sodium ingredients in texture and taste. And that's because in creating flavor, we use several things. We use our smell, we use our eyes, and we use our palate, not just to get the flavor, but the interesting things tend to be like differences in, this is a mushy potatoes, but it's got something crispy on top. That makes that dish automatically more enjoyable. So if you can replicate texture and or taste, you're probably going to get pretty close to the original. The third thing you do is brainstorm potential substitutions that can mimic those textures and tastes. And the last thing you do is you just go for it, you dive in, and you give it a try. Because the worst thing that can happen is it tastes horrible and you have chocolate for dinner. Dark chocolate for dinner. But you have to give it a try, because you'll never know. And the great part about cooking is that as you go, you can always add a little bit more of this or a little bit of more of this. And at some point, you are going to hit a low sodium home run, and you will never settle for less. So what is a food that you miss? Does anybody have a food that they really, really miss eating?
Tomato-based foods like spaghetti and lasagna because of the potatoes.
Okay, great. And you and that?
Lox.
Lox. That's a tough one. But I'm going to start with them, and I'm going to finish with you. So I miss bagels more than anything. And I remember I was on dialysis, and I would get so dehydrated that the first thing I would do was go to the bagel shop and get a bagel and cream cheese and lox, which was definitely not the point of dialysis. I've learned a lot since then. So I really miss bagels and cream cheese and lox. So how I salt-free bagel and cream cheese and lox is one way, and yes, again, this does take effort, so you have to decide how much time you have, but if you really wanted it, you can easily make bagels from scratch. It's really not that hard. I have done it. You have a mixer, you mix the dough, you let it rise, you dump it in boiling water, you got a bagel. And you can actually, when you bake it, you can season it with things like sesame or onion powder or mace or curry even. You could go crazy with what you want to season it with. I even season it with seaweed sometimes, which is a really great natural salt replacement if you use Pacific seaweed. So there's your bagel. As for the cream cheese, certain ricotta is actually quite low in sodium. You can find some that's 24 milligrams per half a cup, so that would offer a kind of creamy base. Also, creme fraiche is quite low in sodium for small amounts. So you could use that too as your spread. I also figured out how to make low sodium or salt-free, sodium-free mayonnaise the other day, which depending again on your health needs is silken tofu blended with some seasonings and vinegar. So you can make very low sodium spread. Lox. That is difficult because it is a cured meat product. Now, here is my solution for that. Buy sashimi grade salmon. It won't be cured, it'll have the same color, it'll have the same texture, so you can use that. Or thinly sliced tomatoes. It's not going to be lox, but you will still have your bagel sandwich. So that's how I think about those challenges. And yours, tomato-based products. Is there anything in particular that you missed?
Lasagna, spaghetti.
And because of the
sauce.
potassium?
Right, and the phosphorus of the meat sauce.
Yeah.
With it.
Okay, so maybe you can help me with this, but I still eat tomato-based products because I don't have to worry about my potassium. And you can either make tomato, for those of you that can eat tomatoes, you can make tomato puree from scratch, or there's a lot of really good bottled versions that either have 0 to 10 milligrams of sodium per serving. And actually, if you look for true Italian brand tomato products, those are the ones that will typically have 0 to very low sodium in them, because Italian food, real Italian food, whether it's homemade pasta or tomato products, don't have sodium in it because they rely on things like their cured olives and cured meat for the salt in their cooking. So a lot of Italian bread also doesn't have sodium in it. But if you can't have tomato, I use pumpkin.
But that's high in potassium.
Is that high in potassium as well?
Carrots you might.
Pureed carrots, or even pureed cauliflower, or pureed squash. Is squash high in potassium?
Yeah.
Is it? But if you start thinking of things, is eggplant a problem because of phosphorus?
Potassium.
Potassium too? Okay. That's a whole other topic.
You just don't make it too thick, you know, if you have to put a lot of water in your sauce.
Mm-hmm. And mushrooms.
That's potassium.
That's, oh my gosh. Well, then I'm gonna have to start rethinking a lot of new recipes.
Tomato products are the top,
Okay, let me chew on that for the social hour.
They're
And,
yellow tomatoes, less potassium.
Less potassium. What about green tomatoes?
What kind of potatoes?
Yellow ones.
Yellow ones are
Yellow
less?
tomatoes.
Are peppers high in potassium as well?
Probably.
Well, there you go. Peppers. Peppers will thicken up just like tomatoes. It'll have a similar color. Another thing you can do is, are beets high in potassium?
No, it always depends on the quantity.
Yeah.
And what else you eat. You know?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, just, it's thinking outside, it's going through the checklist and figuring out, but I don't know, it sounds like peppers might be a good substitution for that, if they are low in potassium. But I'll keep thinking about it for you. And the most important thing is, once you've designed your diet and you've started thinking creatively about these things and finding these solutions, you're not only not limited anymore in your kitchen necessarily, you're not limited in your life anymore either. So you can explore the world beyond your kitchen. You can travel easily on a low sodium diet at home and abroad. One of the things I started to do is I realized that if I was traveling in a country where English wasn't the first language, ordering food and getting food would be extremely difficult. And one of the things I do here at home is I have a card, a laminated card that I bring with me every time I go out to eat. And it not only has the ingredients I can't eat on it, it has the ingredients I can eat on it. Which means I've found that when a chef knows the things that they can use, they're much more excited about trying something that goes beyond the bland basics. And I've been able to eat effortlessly anywhere because of this card. And so when I was going on my honeymoon recently, I was going to Thailand, and I realized this card's not gonna work. And I thought about it, and I realized this card in Thai will work. And all I had to do was call a wonderful Stanford hospital who got it translated for me and sent it back. So there's always a solution, even with tomato sauces, and we will come up with one. And you can go backpacking, and I love to hike, and I love to be out where you don't have that much room to carry big cans of beans. And so I had to come up with some pretty creative solutions for whether it's backpacking or going on a hike. And I don't want to make my own granola or only eat, oatmeal every day. My wonderful mother-in-law bought a dehydrator and dehydrated food for me to take on the trip. And I actually called a backpacking dehydrated food company and asked, do you have any kind of veggies or proteins that are sodium free? And they said, yes, they do have a whole line of vegetables already and pastas, and that they are coming out with an entire line of low sodium backpacking foods in the coming year. So it's happening, you guys. And the more we ask, the more it'll happen. And most importantly, preparing for emergencies. It wasn't until all of these recent earthquakes that I realized my earthquake kit is loaded with sodium. And so it's thinking about things like that, finding, the granola bars that don't have salt in them, or the little peanut butter packets or nut butter packets that don't have salt in them and will keep for a long time and are small and compactable. So there are always things you just have to know, where you need to make the changes, and then get creative on how you're going to solve them. And then there's things like weddings and dinner parties and eating on someone else's tab. Think of this. Who here has a friend that is a picky eater, and when they go out, they ask for the BLT without the bacon, the lettuce on the side, and instead of the turkey, chicken? And yet we don't feel like we can ask for special requests. I know it took me a long time to realize that I can ask for special requests, and people are more than happy to not only cook low sodium or salt free, but the more I asked, the more people I brought into my world. And now when I go out, whether it's a barbecue or a potluck, my friends go onto my website to find recipes to make food for me that is salt or sodium free. So share. It's really important that you're open and you ask, and above all, you're grateful, because the more you let other people in, you'll find that they are more than willing to be a part of it with you, and they're going to find it fun too. And then finally, things like racing, running, and playing. Whether it's that you're going to the baseball game and you can't eat anything at the ballpark, there are ways that you can pack your purse or your bag full of things that'll keep you full throughout the game and cheering wildly. Or if you're racing, as was said, I completed my 6th triathlon a month ago, and I realized that all of the electrolyte-filled drinks and power bars and things like that were chock full of sodium. But there are brands that are extremely low and have enough to keep my body fueled. And there's things like, instead of Gatorade, drink coconut water. Coconut water is a natural electrolyte. And I was going to say, for the people asking about milk products, I use coconut milk all the time, and not the kind that comes in the cans, because that's really high in sugar, but the new coconut milk, I think it's called So Good or something like that, coconut milk, that come in little single size servings now, or box cartons, and it's a great replacement for milk in recipes and breakfast, and it's totally delicious. And then finally, eating out and eating well. This is just one of the amazing meals I have received when I've dined out, without notice. So again, the more educated you are, the more you can educate others, and then the better you will eat and live. So that is my life beyond salt. I am definitely way more of an exciting individual than I was 7 years ago because of it. And I have found it to be hugely helpful to my health. And as I said, being able to be proactive and at least do something to make sure that my medicine and my body has the best chance of working. And above all else, it's empowering. So I really encourage you to do the same. And now, question? You in the back.
Do you recommend any processed veggie burgers, store-bought veggie burgers, low in sodium?
It's a really great question. I actually haven't found one quite yet that's low in sodium, but I just made one the other day with my Cuisinart with garbanzo beans, egg, some leftover salt-free tortilla chips that were going stale that I crumbled up. But you could also make your own breadcrumbs from no sodium bread pretty easily, or use matzo meal, which is 0 sodium in it. Then you don't have to do any work making the breadcrumbs. And I just put veggies, garbanzo beans, 1 egg yolk, which only has 8 milligrams of sodium in it. The sodium is in the white. Into a food processor and made them into patties. They were done in 20 minutes.
Why is there so much sodium in processed food? What's the reasoning behind it?
So there's a couple reasons. I actually, he asked why there's so much sodium in processed foods. I thought it was for preservative reasons. Turns out sodium has very little to do with preserving food. There's only a few items that it's necessary for, but there's other ways you can preserve items without salt. The reason salt got introduced and why it's so high now is it does develop flavor. The chemistry, no one's really sure exactly what's happening when salt lands on your taste bud, but it extends flavor. It makes this little bit of chicken taste like this much chicken in your mouth. And so in order to cut costs, a lot of companies add more salt so they can use less whole ingredients. As costs have been getting cut and people's taste buds want more and more salt, those numbers got higher. Now, I thought about 2 years ago, this was my first salt-free recipe that I made. I wanted pickles, and I wanted them very badly. And so I was like, I'm determined to make a salt-free pickle. And pickling, I mean, what on earth needs salt more than a pickle? It's part of the curing process, it's that taste you want. And I figured out how to make salt-free pickles, and they taste delicious, and I'd be happy to share that recipe with anybody. You can find it on my blog. Now, I soon realized I wasn't the only one doing this. And there was actually somebody on the big consumer market who's making low-sodium pickles that only have 40 milligrams per serving, and a serving is like half the jar of pickles, so it's really low. And it's called Rick's Picks Pickles. And I called Rick, I actually met Rick, and I asked him, like, how is this even possible? Is there really not salt in it? Because it kind of tastes salty. And Rick doesn't use any salt. He uses really good vinegars, like apple cider vinegar and champagne vinegar, because distilled white vinegar is pretty tasteless. So the better the product is, the more taste it'll have, but it'll be more expensive. So that's why if you're cutting costs, you're not going to use those vinegars. But Rick does. And he also uses all fresh, farm fresh ingredients, which again, are all going to have more flavor in them. And the real kicker is he uses tons of different spices, everything from turmeric to coriander, so that adds a lot of flavor. And he uses beets. And beets have a good amount of natural salt in it. They have about 54 milligrams per 1 beet. And letting that beet soak in that pickling liquid does the trick. So the point of that being is food industry isn't going to start lowering the salt in real ways anytime soon that really meet a strict low sodium diet. But it is possible. And that's why we have to redefine the flavors that we're looking for and start getting used to tasting the flavors in food and other spices and enjoying them just as much as the salt. Because if we stop wanting that food that tastes like salt, but that salt that's enhancing the food, then the numbers are going to lower. Yes?
I don't know if this is a valid technique, but I'm wondering if you had some input in that. But sometimes there's certain cured meats that I just really, really love, but I know the sodium is. So I've been performing dialysis on them. I would soak, like for example, a smoked salmon.
Yeah.
Or that. I would actually soak them in water for overnight or something like that. And then I find that it tends to pull out some of the salt in it, and it really reduces it. I mean, am I actually doing something right?
No, you're onto something. And he asked, is there ways you can cure and smoke and make salty meat products without the salt? There are a lot of, and I'm actually seriously working on it too, because I really miss things like beef jerky and bacon and those kinds of things. you can easily create your own, you can make your own smoker at home, you can buy a smoker, and you can actually smoke fish without salt. It's that smoky taste and you're dehydrating it is what you're doing. In terms of bacon, that one's a little bit more complicated because you're actually breaking down, I think, the protein in the bacon itself. But I've heard that there's ways you can do it actually with sugar. And I've actually been trying to wrap my meat in things like bonito flakes and Pacific seaweed, which have naturally occurring salts. It's only landed me with stomach aches, so it's not ready yet for public consumption. But I know this guy, Rick's Picks, is actually coming out with a line of jerky, and he's working on ways to do it with low sodium as well. So, you know, I think it's just about what you're accustomed to and changing those customs.
Can you give us your web page?
Oh, the webpage, yes. It is simply www.sodiumgirl.com. That site is a bit under reconstruction, so it'll direct you to a different site, which if you want to write this down, this is the one that I'm keeping up currently. I write 3 times a week. It's www.sodiumgirl.wordpress, wordpress.com, and you can all email me at sodiumgirl@gmail.com with any questions. Yeah. Thank you all so much.